They say money can't buy love, but it turns out you just have to wait till the end for the check to come. We trade uncomfortable truths for comfortable lies, imaginary solutions to real problems. I'm James Sexton, host of Unlikely Sources. You may know me from my books or my many interviews, such as Soft White Underbelly, Lex Friedman, or one of the many other places I've shared my perspective on love, life, and the law. I know a divorce lawyer isn't the first person you think of for advice on how to keep your relationship strong, but wisdom is found in unexpected, counterintuitive places. In sickness, we see the value of health. The Godfather, he can teach you more about business than an MBA. Fight Club, it's actually about religion. The most valuable practical wisdom comes from unlikely sources, and it's time we sit up and pay attention to what they can teach us. So if you're looking for compelling conversation, blunt talk about culture, religion, romance, and how to navigate life in the machine of modern society, I'll look forward to spending some time with you. I'm Jim Sexton. Unlikely Sources will be available May 28th.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 366 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
We're just coming off of the Memorial Day weekend, recording early.
We are.
So that we can get everything done before we head out to CrimeCon.
It's a crunch time.
Yep. Looking forward to it.
I got a lot to do.
You do. Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Emily Wasson.
Hey, Wasson.
Heather Caval DiMiola.
Easy for you to say.
Not really. I hope I got it right.
DiMioli.
Jenny Heather.
Hey, Jenny.
Candy.
What's up, Candy?
Alessandra Galletti.
Oh, thanks, Alessandra.
Carrie Gimmond.
Hey, Carrie.
Crystal Valdez.
Appreciate that, Valdez.
And last but not least, Stephanie Yelvington.
Well, there's Stephanie.
And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected David Regan.
What's up, Regan?
We also had a great PayPal donation from Mark Despain.
Hey, Mark, appreciate that.
Yeah, so we appreciate all the support we get. Gibbs, we have an episode out right now on True Crime All the Time where we're talking about Father Gerald Robinson and the murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul. This is up in Toledo, Ohio, happened back in the 80s. And, you know, it took them a very long time, over 20 years, to kind of figure out who murdered Sister Margaret.
Well, you know, when you have so much trust in someone
who is in a position of trust.
Yes.
I think it was very hard to believe early on, even though he was a person of interest, that he was capable of this type of thing.
Yeah, because it was a very brutal crime.
Absolutely brutal. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am.
We're talking about the Blue Ridge murders. On July 22nd, 1966, 3 bodies were found near Lake Summit in Henderson County, North Carolina. The victims were 43-year-old Vernon Shipman, 36-year-old Charles Glass, and 61-year-old Louise Shumate. Vernon and Charles had been friends for over 10 years. But Louise had no known connection to the men. And nearly 60 years later, their murders remain unsolved. Now, most of the information for this episode comes from the Hendersonville Times-News. In July 2006, reporter Jenny Giles published a series for the Times-News titled Small Town, Big Crime. And she spent 8 months researching the case and conducting interviews with investigators, family members, and even one of the suspects. Vernon Shipman was born on January 7th, 1923 in Hendersonville, North Carolina. He graduated from Hendersonville High in 1944. Vernon was drafted after high school graduation, but he served in the military for less than a year. No one knows why he left, and he never really talked about it with family and friends. Jenny Giles could not find his discharge papers. Now, I don't think it's that uncommon for some people who have served not to really want to talk about their time. I know I had an uncle who served in Vietnam. He absolutely would not talk about it. I think it was just a subject he didn't want to relive. This is a little different. You know, he was in the military for less than a year, doesn't want to talk about why he left. So to me, there's something there.
Yeah. Who knows what his experience was, but obviously it sounds like maybe it wasn't good.
After he left the military, Vernon graduated from Blanton's Business College in Asheville, North Carolina in the late 1940s. He worked in Washington. In the early 50s, he started working for the North Carolina Employment Security Commission. His coworkers thought he was dependable and hardworking. Vernon lived with his parents in Hendersonville all his life, excluding the times he left home to serve in the military, attend college, or work out of state.
I was just stuck on that dependable and hardworking. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like somebody you know.
Like somebody who's sitting across from me?
Oh, well, I mean, if you're going to, yeah, sure, I'll take that.
Like you weren't talking about yourself?
You know.
Okay.
I'll take credit for that. Thanks.
I got you. But do you think it's strange that, you know, here's a guy who lived with his parents essentially all his life, even though it sounds like he had a pretty good job, probably had the means to move out.
I think it's a little strange.
Now, there are some reasons. Maybe he was helping to take care of them. We don't know, right, exactly why that would have been. But what I do know is most people can't wait to kind of get out on their own. In 1952, Vernon started a record shop called Tempo Music. The business was originally set up in the corner of a hotel lobby. 1952. That's pre-Elvis. I mean, you know, you haven't really hit the rock and roll bonanza at that point.
Yet.
I don't know what records you're selling in 1952. Perry Como. I don't know who was active in the early 50s, but Vernon's co-founder was a man named Charles Glass, whom he met in the late 40s or early 50s. The two men developed a close friendship that lasted more than a decade. They started a cafe together before they founded Tempo. The record shop was a successful business venture, and they eventually moved into a space on Main Street in Hendersonville.
You probably were listening to like Benny Goodman if you were around back then.
Maybe.
You would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In his orchestra?
Yes.
But, you know, I do want to talk about the record shop or, you know, the music store. As we got a little bit older, CDs came along, all of that. But you had cassette tapes, records, CDs, H-track. Did you say H-track?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm pretty sure it was 8-track.
Yeah, those.
For you.
Yeah.
I myself never listened to an 8-track, but I do know what they are. But that was like such a big deal. Getting to go to the mall.
Oh, yeah.
Where they had a record store or, you know, somewhere where you could just see all the latest stuff. You know, there was no Apple Music or some way to stream any song you wanted at any time on your phone.
I mean, if you think about some of the really good movies back in the late 80s, 90s, like your time frame, you know, you had Empire Records. That was a huge movie.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you know, because it was like, you know, one of those big record stores. And that's how it was, right? When you went to the mall, you went to these big record stores and you could flip through and find your favorite artist and go to the listening booth to check it out.
Yeah, well, short of listening to the radio and perhaps recording that song on a cassette, which a lot of us did back then,
right.
There was no way to kind of preserve a song and listen to it whenever you wanted other than going out and buying it. Charles Glass was born on September 16th, 1929 in Asheville, North Carolina. He joined the Army in the 40s and was discharged in August 1951. By 1952, he was living in Hendersonville. Charles was the manager of Tempo Records. He also worked as a night clerk at the Vanderbilt Hotel in Asheville and the Battery Park Hotel. In addition to this, he wrote a weekly advice column for the WNC Tribune, a Hendersonville paper.
Oh, interesting. I also write a advice column,
which is called
Advice by Gibby.
Advice by Gibby.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what jumped out at me is this guy's got a lot going on.
Pretty busy, right?
Managing a record store, night clerk at a hotel. And, one of these is pretty famous, right? That Vanderbilt
Oh, sure is.
hotel. The record shop was a popular spot for the local teens, and Charles and Vernon were well known in town. Vernon was described as quiet and easygoing. He loved to cook and host dinner parties. He was also close to his family because he was his parents' only child. Charles loved music and was a performer. He recorded albums when he lived in Baltimore in the 1940s. Charles once opened for Esther Phillips, aka Little Esther. Esther was a black rhythm and blues singer who rose to prominence in 1950. She died in 1984. So he must have had some chops.
Yeah.
As a performer, to open for somebody who was pretty famous. Charles and Esther maintained their friendship over the years. At this time, interracial friendships were not common or widely accepted in the South. When Esther came to visit Charles in Hendersonville, some people burned a cross in his yard, according to a former employee at Tempo. Charles and Vernon recorded at least 2 records together, with Charles singing and Vernon playing the piano. One of Charles's songs was called Screamin' and Dyin' and was about a man who kills his lover because they cheated. The song was released around the U.S. and was written about by Cashbox magazine. And for those listening who don't really know anything about Cashbox magazine, that was huge. I mean, it really kind of painted the picture of what was popular.
Really?
Now, there was a big payola scandal that involved, I think, paying to get played or paying to get your single up the list on Cashbox magazine. I don't remember exactly what it was about, but it was a big thing, Cashbox magazine.
Yeah, so if you were in it, you were something at that moment.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a big deal to be in it. Charles was an outgoing and friendly person. He was known for hosting parties at his home. At times, more than 100 people would show up for the party. This guy is so unlike me. He couldn't be more unlike me.
I'm just thinking about 100 people showing up at your home. You would freak out.
Well, there's 2 things. First of all, I don't host parties. Secondly, I'm not even sure that I would know 100 people to invite to a party if I was so inclined. Charles also enjoyed going out to clubs. On December 5th, 1965, Charles fell and broke his shin and ankle, and his legs didn't heal properly, and he was still using crutches at the time of his death. That's rough, man. Breaking your shin and your ankle.
It's a painful break.
Yeah, I have broken an ankle once. It was not fun. Not broken a shin. Your shins are kind of resilient, but
when they get injured and they hurt.
Have you broken a shin?
I haven't broken it, but I've bruised it pretty good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that seems like on the same level as what we're talking about. Another one of Charles's interests was voodoo. He published a booklet titled Tales of Voodoo and Black Magic under the pen name Charles Lever, which is the French word for glass. I cannot believe how much this guy is going on.
He's a busy guy, man.
How does he have time to do all of these things he's doing? You ever read about people like this and just think, man, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah, I'm wasting a lot of time, I guess.
I guess I could be doing a lot more.
I mean, you tell me all the time I'm wasting a lot of time, but maybe I really am.
Maybe. One friend told the Hendersonville Times-News that Charles was not serious about voodoo. In fact, he might have been somewhat of a scam artist. He sold products to black people in the area, including a special elixir and curses. His charms and hexes were just crushed herbs, according to the Hendersonville Times-News. But this is something that, goes back so many years. Tonics.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Cure-alls.
Potions.
Dr. Feelgood's cure-all medicine. I don't know, whatever it is. There's always someone willing to bet on and buy a product claiming it will do X. I mean, look at it today. It's $1 billion industry.
Sure is.
People are advertising and selling things that really don't work.
It's the placebo effect.
Easy for you to say. One of the most important facts about Vernon Shipman and Charles Glass is that both men were gay. Most people in Hendersonville knew this. Sources did not report that Vernon and Charles were in a relationship with each other or that they were in a serious relationship with anyone else at the time of their deaths. Although many people knew Vernon and Charles were gay, they weren't very open about it because members of the LGBTQ community were not accepted in small southern towns at this time. Vernon Shipman and Charles Glass were last seen alive on Sunday, July 17th, 1966. The day before, Charles was in a sullen mood, according to Calvert Hunt Jr., a former employee of Tempo Music. Vernon was invited to a business dinner the following day, and Charles was not. So apparently, he felt slighted.
Oh, I get that.
It's happened to you many times.
Absolutely.
Where I've been invited somewhere, you haven't.
Yes.
You don't understand why that is. It all seems very obvious, but you just can't pick it up. On July 17th, Charles called a friend and an employee that morning to ask him out to lunch, but he had other plans. Vernon ate a late breakfast with his father, Harley Shipman. Vernon was still home when Harley left. He was on the phone with Charles around 2 p.m. Johnny Pistolas, the owner of Johnny's restaurant in nearby Mountain Home, reported that Charles and Vernon ate lunch together and were both drinking between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. So we are kind of setting up their schedule, their day. After that, they stopped to see their friends at an antique shop. Vernon, Charles, and their friend Robert Amsden were supposed to eat dinner together that evening. Around 4:45 p.m., Robert Amsden called Vernon to tell him their dinner would be at the Hendersonville Country Club, and it was now at 6 instead of 5:30. Charles answered the phone and said that he would tell Vernon. Vernon was supposed to pick up Amsden at the Echo Inn at 5:30, but he never showed up. Sue Nichols, a friend of Vernon's, called him at 5:30. Charles answered the phone, and he sounded drunk. According to Sue, she could hear someone else, who she assumed was Vernon, telling Charles to get off the phone. Charles said, "No, Vernon, God, no, don't hit me," and the phone went dead.
Interesting.
Well, I think it's interesting on a number of levels. First of all, if you're Sue on the other end of the line, you're trying to figure out what in the heck that means.
Yeah, what just happened?
And then secondly, it's interesting from the standpoint that both of these individuals we know are going to wind up dead. And what does this interaction, if it did actually occur, mean? A woman identified as Mrs. Hubert Orr saw Vernon's car driving north on NC 191 around 5:45 p.m. She saw Vernon driving and Charles in the passenger seat. There were two people in the back she did not recognize. Amsden called Vernon at 5:45 when he had not arrived to pick him up, but he didn't get an answer. He canceled the reservations after 6 and waited in the lobby until 7. And that's about 50 minutes longer than I would have waited.
Yeah, you don't wait very long at all. You have no patience.
I have very little patience. Now, today we have cell phones. People can call or you can call them. But if I say we're meeting at 6 o'clock and 6:05, 6:10 rolls around and I can't get a hold of you, you haven't called me, I'm not waiting around till 7 to see if you show up. I'm leaving.
You're gone.
I'm gone. Ronnie Hollifield, a circulation manager for the Hendersonville Times-News, saw Vernon on Evans Road, a single-lane dirt road in Hendersonville. Hollifield stopped at a curve in the road and waved Vernon through. He saw Charles in the passenger seat and two others he didn't know in the back seat, a woman with what he described as an odd smile and a man wearing sunglasses. A woman with an odd smile.
Just trying to think what a odd smile would be. Like a fake smile?
Like a forced or fake, maybe?
Yeah.
As the car got closer, the strange man obscured his face. The woman, however, looked over at Holyfield and smiled, with what I assume was an odd smile.
Yeah.
This unknown man became the main subject of the investigation. Many investigators believe he was the killer. Holyfield described the third man as white and 40 to 50 years old with light hair. He was wearing a dark blue suit with pinstripes. Vernon and Charles were last seen at 6:30 p.m. on Little River Road by Tempo employee Calvert Hunt Jr. He saw Vernon's car heading to US 25 South. The one thing that is really jumping out at me is the number of people that saw Vernon's car that night.
A lot of eyewitnesses.
Yeah, a lot of people recognized his car, actually saw 4 individuals in the car, knew that it was Vernon, Charles, a strange woman, a strange man.
Very observant.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Now, maybe it's a small town atmosphere.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other kind of thing. I don't know. Harley Shipman got home at 8:30 p.m. and saw that the front door was open. Vernon's coat and tie were on Harley's bed, which was unusual. Vernon's parents were worried when he didn't come home, but he was an adult. The Charlotte Observer quoted Harley as saying, "He always did tell me where he was going, or always left a note, and said when he'd be back, I always knew where he was going to be and how long he was going to stay. But this time, he just told me he was going up to Echo Inn to eat dinner that night. When I left here at 2:30 that Sunday, Vernon and his friend Glass were still here. That's the bad thing about it. I don't know what time they left, and I don't know what they were going to do." Vernon and Charles were officially reported missing on Wednesday, July 20th. And it's been said that prejudice likely influenced the case from the beginning. Retired Hendersonville Police Chief Bill Powers told the Hendersonville Times-News, "We had a report of Shipman and Glass missing prior to the bodies being found, both being homosexuals. We thought they were probably off partying someplace."
Okay.
As if all gay men are partying all the time?
I guess that's the way that we're supposed to take that.
But you and I, throughout the years, have covered, a lot of episodes where it does seem very likely that prejudice played a big role in the investigation. Whether it was because police thought that or knew that the victim was a sex worker, whether it was due to race or sexual orientation, there's no doubt that over the years, police have treated some of these cases differently.
Yeah. Just a strange assumption to make.
What, that they were partying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when it comes directly after both being homosexual, you can only take that to mean because they were homosexuals, they must have been out partying.
Right. Just so strange.
Harley Shipman stormed into the Times-News office to demand that they put his son's picture on the front page. Circulation manager Ronnie Holyfield overheard him and said he saw Vernon on Sunday afternoon with Charles Glass and 2 unidentified passengers. On July 22nd, 1966, the bodies of 43-year-old Vernon Shipman, 36-year-old Charles Glass, and 61-year-old Louise Shumate were found in a grassy clearing near Lake Summit in Henderson County, North Carolina. The bodies were found by Charles Hill and Larry Shipman, both with the Lake Summit Corps. They were driving on a dirt road off North Lake Summit Road and were at a spot where people normally dump their trash. They were going to dispose of some brush.
Nothing like headed out to the local county site, dump some trash to find a few bodies laying there.
Well, like we always say, right? It's going to change your day very, very quickly. I don't know what your plans were besides the disposing of the brush, but you got other things to worry about. Now, at this point, the 2 men had to drive to get to a phone. At first, dispatch sent an ambulance driver that worked for a local funeral service, but within a few hours, the county rescue squad, sheriff's deputies, police officers, and highway patrol were at the scene. The bodies were decomposed, because they had been out for days in the summer heat. The bodies were lying in a semicircle with objects placed on top of them. All 3 victims died from skull fractures. Investigators came to believe that the murder weapon was part of an automobile jack. The killer put an 18-inch long piece of scrap iron on Vernon's neck. Charles' crutches were laid on top of him in the shape of a cross. Louise Shumate had a whiskey bottle on her neck.
Okay, this is all bizarre.
It's very bizarre. I mean, we have 3 brutal murders, but then it's the posing of the bodies and putting various objects on the bodies. Louise and Charles had puncture wounds to their bodies. Charles was punctured 21 times and Louise was punctured 17 times. The men were fully clothed, but Louise was partially undressed. Rape kits and DNA testing were not available at the time, but the police believe she was sexually assaulted based on the evidence they had. Louise's blouse was pulled back from her shoulders and her slacks were below her knees. Her bra was found a few feet from her body, and a portion of an automobile jack was inserted into her vagina. I mean, Gibbs, we're dealing with one seriously nasty individual here.
Yeah, definitely a sick son of a you-know-what.
A medical examiner later determined that Louise was punctured before she died. Her left wrist and elbow were broken, which indicated she put up an arm to block the attacker. She had other bruises on her genitals and inner thighs, which likely occurred during the sexual assault. Investigators found Louise's sunglasses nearby, along with the 2 men's wallets and Louise's change purse. Vernon and Charles's wallets were empty. Louise's purse had 16 cents inside. So we have 3 brutal murders, skull fractures, punctures,
sexual assault,
a very nasty sexual assault, but we also have robbery. So we have some different motives here, potentially, but it was unclear what, if any, connection Louise had to Charles and Vernon. And we mentioned it up front and kind of detailed it out, right? Charles and Vernon had been friends for over 10 years.
Yeah, they were close.
But I don't think anyone who knew them knew Louise. Louise Davis Shumate was born in Asheville, North Carolina on August 21st, 1904. She went to nursing school from 1923 to 1925, but she never had a career as a nurse. She moved often and lived in different states around the U.S. In 1933, she married Azel Francis Shumate from Beckley, West Virginia. The couple moved to Massachusetts. In 1937, Louise returned to Asheville alone, and she divorced her husband in 1942. She had moved back to North Carolina by 1961. Her niece, Linda Sherlin, told the Hendersonville Times-News that she was a very private person and a hard person to get to know. I understand that. I have met a number of people like that in my life. Doesn't mean they're bad people.
No.
But some people are more private than others. They don't let their guard down right away. It takes a while for them to open up to you.
I'm pretty private.
You are.
Yeah.
Louise didn't have a phone. She enjoyed photography and often carried her camera around with her, but she did not keep any photos in her apartment. Louise only told her family about one friend, a woman named Ruby Taylor, who lived in Henderson County. Louise started working at the Taylor Instrument Company in Arden, North Carolina in 1963. Her coworkers said she was difficult to get along with, mean, and racist. All right, I've known some people who fit one or all of those
Descriptions
in my working life. Louise lived at the Ravenscroft Apartments in Asheville, but her family didn't learn this until after she died. She wouldn't give her address to anyone. When her family went to her apartment after she was killed, they said there were no personal items inside. And some of this about her is pretty strange, you'd have to say. She carried a camera everywhere she went, yet had no pictures.
Right.
inside of her place. She didn't even have any type of personal items.
Kind of like a pretty mysterious.
It's almost like a safe house or something. According to her niece, Linda Sherlin, Louise liked to go to parties, but not family functions.
I think there's a lot of people that would prefer to go to a party than a family function.
Yeah, not everybody's family functions are what people would call at the top of their list.
Yeah, a good time.
A lot of that depends on your family.
Exactly.
Or your extended family. For unknown reasons, Louise lied about her age. She listed her birth year as 1911 on her driver's license. She would not be the first person to make herself younger than what she really was.
No, I think it's a pretty popular thing to do.
With some people. Workers at the Horseshoe Post Office, where she collected her mail, thought she was in her mid-40s. Her coworkers thought she looked 15 years younger than what she really was.
Oh, yeah, I get that a lot, too.
That you look 15 years younger?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, my gosh, you must be 85. No, but this is saying something about her.
It is. It really is.
Obviously, she must have taken pretty good care of herself to stay looking so young, or she was just genetically gifted, which I guess some people are.
Some people are lucky like that.
Investigators tried to retrace Louise's last day. They learned she went to work on Friday, July 15th, and called her niece on the evening of the 16th. She was last seen leaving her apartment at 4:30 p.m. on July 17th. Both Vernon and Louise's vehicles were found while they were still considered missing persons. And there were two important vehicle sightings during that time period. Two teens were on North Lake Summit Road. At 9 p.m. on July 17th, they saw a light blue 1963 Pontiac parked on a dirt trail that led to the clearing where the bodies were found. A man named Bruce Gordon took North Lake Summit Road at 5:45 a.m. on Monday, July 18th, and saw 4 men and 3 cars at the dirt trail. At 5:30 p.m. on July 20th, Vernon's Ford Fairlane was found by the Hendersonville police on a road parallel to the local railroad tracks. It also happened to be near his home on Maple Street. Witnesses said the car had been there since at least 7 a.m. on the 18th. The back seat was pushed forward. There was a hole in the middle of the back seat and the separator board that joined the back window. It was thought that Vernon most likely made the hole because he lost the key to his trunk. Vernon's jack was missing, but a jack shaft was found at the crime scene. A brand new jack was found in the trunk of his car, believed to be from a Pontiac. 3 tires were muddy, but the 4th was clean, and 2 hubcaps were missing. One of Vernon's hubcaps had been stolen before the murders, but it was unclear what happened to the second one. There were scratches on the side of the car, and 2 fingerprints were found on the rearview mirror.
Just more mystery, right?
There's a lot of mystery here. Just take the jack. Right? It's thought to have been the murder weapon. His jack was missing from his car, but a brand new jack was found in the trunk of his car, believed to be from another vehicle.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Why are 3 tires muddy, but the 4th is clean?
Yeah, was that the one that had to be changed? I don't know.
And that's why a jack was out at some point. Louise's preferred brand of cigarettes, Pall Mall, were found in the right rear ashtray. One had cigarette lipstick stains on it. Harley Shipman had the oil changed on July 15th. The car had been driven 259 miles since then, but the drive from Vernon's house to where he was found was just 40 miles. So that's a pretty big discrepancy there when you think about the time frame. This oil was changed not long at all before the murders occurred. 200 and some miles of driving in that short amount of time.
Yeah. So how did that get racked up?
Yeah. You have to account for it. Almost a year later, on May 11th, 1967, a local teen named Dennis Waters signed a statement admitting that he and other youths found Vernon's car on July 17th and moved it to where the police found it. They found the car parked in the grass near Ray Avenue and 7th Avenue East, about 6 miles from the crime scene. They went out for a joyride and returned the car where they found it. They came back to strip the tires and brought a jack with them, but they decided not to go through with it and left the jack on the back floorboard. So that helps answer, I think, some of the questions.
It does.
They probably racked up quite a few of those miles. Probably helps explain where this new jack came from, or at least a jack from another vehicle. On July 19th, a light blue Ford Fairlane was reported abandoned on NC Highway 191 near the French Broad River in the Rugby community. The car was first seen on July 18th. The windows were down, the doors unlocked, and the key was in the ignition. This car belonged to Louise Shumate. A complete jack was in the car. Louise's handbag was hanging on the door handle, and her camera was inside the vehicle. Louise's friend Ruby Taylor said she and Louise had picked blackberries near the location where the car was found. And there are some strange things about this to me. Windows down, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. But then you also have her handbag and her camera, which people said she took with her pretty much everywhere, was inside the vehicle. Is this how someone would normally leave a vehicle if they were going off with someone else? And I would say probably not.
Yeah, even if it was in the 60s, right? You still wanted to lock up certain things.
Well, you're not just going to leave your handbag sitting there.
Not your expensive camera.
Initially, investigators thought Louise was killed because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of her hobbies was driving down back roads, and as a friend mentioned, she had gone blackberry picking before. The theory was that she was killed because she witnessed something. However, there were no items in her car or on her person to indicate she was out picking blackberries.
You ever pick blackberries?
I don't know about blackberries specifically. I have picked berries a number of times.
Yeah. I pick blackberries at least once a year. Wild ones.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, at least I think they're blackberries. I haven't had any medical conditions from eating them afterwards, so I think I'm safe.
You did tell me a story about taking off all your clothes and running through the forest one time after eating some berries.
Yeah, but I was okay.
Oh.
Didn't have to go to the hospital.
Wasn't out of the ordinary, is what you're saying. That was just
I just had to sign the police report.
Just a Thursday night.
I just signed the police report.
But as you can imagine, right, the entire community was terrified after the murders. It was all anyone could talk about. And there were many rumors revolving around the secret lives of Charles Glass and Vernon Shipman. Authorities believed that they had a large pool of suspects because Vernon and Charles were very social people. We mentioned it, right? One of them had a party and invited like 100 people.
Yeah. That's a lot of people to consider.
Or have to interview, have to cross off. One anonymous former State Bureau of Investigation official told the Hendersonville Times-News that man Glass had relationships with wealthy, prominent men all over Asheville and Hendersonville. There were rumors that their death was a hate crime, but most of the people in town knew the men were gay before they were killed. Although locals might not have liked or approved of this fact, sources did not report that anyone openly hated them. Authorities also ruled out the KKK's involvement in the murders. So I don't think there's any doubt it was a tough time to be gay, especially in the South.
Oh, yeah. I would think so. In the 60s.
But, if they're saying that everyone pretty much knew they were gay, nobody had an issue with them specifically. Now, they might not have liked it, but they had no known enemies. Okay, you got to take that into account. One of the biggest mysteries was how Louise Shumate was involved in the murders. She did have connections to Henderson County. Her mother grew up in the area, and many of her relatives lived there. She also attended a church in Hendersonville the weekend before the murder. She enjoyed visiting different churches on Sundays. One investigator said to the Asheville Citizen, "It appears that the fourth person in Shipman's car was a friend of Mrs. Shumate rather than of Glass and Shipman. Louise's family mentioned to the police that she might have been addicted to prescription pain pills. Investigators wondered if she was getting those pills illegally. The word in town was that there were drugs at Charles Glass's parties, and there were rumors that they allegedly gave people drugs for sexual favors.
But rumors.
There's always going to be a lot of rumors. And I think sometimes it's hard to separate fact from fiction. But despite all the rumors, investigators never made a formal connection between Louise, Charles, and Vernon. A couple of years after Louise's death, her brother received a call from Asheville Federal Savings and Loan. Louise had $12,000 in her savings account. Her family had no idea how she got this kind of money, which only added to the mystery. Other theories involve blackmail, a jealous lover, or a hitman hired by a wealthy resident of Henderson County.
I mean, I guess you can throw anything up on the wall and see if it sticks.
Yeah. Or you can say that until we know for sure, we can't really discredit any of these things. Is it possible that one of these men was having, some kind of relationship with a wealthy man? It turned south, or there was blackmail, or there was something going on that this person feared being exposed, and they weren't going to take that chance.
And said, take him out, and whoever's with him.
There have been 6 official suspects in the decades since the murders. None of them were ever charged, and all 6 are now dead. Although there were a number of leads, the case went cold and has remained unsolved for decades. Much of the evidence at the crime scene was contaminated by investigators and crowds of people who watched them work. Jenny Giles wrote on her website, Henderson Heritage, the degradation of the crime scene, inexperienced investigators, lack of technology and training, and the reluctance of residents in the county to come forward with information hampered the investigation.
I bet it did.
Well, I think all of that does, right? If you have investigators with little experience, okay, how is the crime scene preserved? Are they keeping people from walking all over it? Is evidence being collected properly? All of that's important. And then, this thing about people being reluctant to come forward with information. On the one hand, you don't really know how many people had credible information.
Yeah.
What I will say in this case especially is that I think there is a possibility that some people could have been reluctant because maybe they didn't want information about them to come to light.
Yeah, they were trying to keep their identity secret.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or their sexual orientation,
Sure.
or whatever it was, something that you may not have in all cases. But in the 1960s in North Carolina, I'm sure there were a lot of people who were gay, but were not wanting that information to come out.
Yes, because they didn't want to deal with
The repercussions. Yeah, absolutely. It's sad that they had to feel that way, but it was a fact of life. Additionally, all the physical evidence in the case is now missing. That's always a big time head scratcher for me.
Sure.
And the number of cases that we've heard that in. It's astounding.
It's like, how do they let that happen? This is unsolved case. It's marked evidence. Did somebody say, you know what? It's been 20 years, 30 years. We don't have the room for it.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and dispose of it.
Now, I understand there are or have been instances where there's a natural disaster or the evidence room floods or catches on fire or whatever. That's going to happen. But in a lot of these cases, it's just missing. They don't know why. They don't know what happened to it. I don't know. Here's the room where we keep all the evidence. And there's really no reason for it to move unless, something comes up and we need that evidence, it should still be there.
Yeah,
but it's not.
I think it's more like someone said, hey, let's clean this file room out a little bit. And then like, oh, down the road.
That would be my wife.
Those were those files that we might need. Oh.
Yeah, that would be my wife. She is very into order and getting rid of things, putting things in different places, only to then not remember where she put it. Lead SBI investigator Gary Satterfield drove all the evidence to the SBI lab in Raleigh. It was stored there until July 14th, 1969. Boxes containing the most important pieces of evidence were given to Henderson County Sheriff James Kilpatrick. The boxes contained the jacks from Vernon and Louise's cars, the iron shaft found at the scene, believed to be the murder weapon, Charles' crutches, and a frog gig shaft. You ever go frog gigging?
I have not went gigging yet.
I have never done it. I know of it, and I know of some people who I grew up with who were into frog gigging. It seems kind of cruel to me, but
yeah. Do you eat frog
legs?
Do you?
I don't.
No, I don't either.
I'm saying people I think who
gig
or catch frogs, eat the legs, I believe.
Only gigging I do is
your weekend gigs.
Yes.
In 2006, the Hendersonville Times-News discovered SBI documents stating that Sheriff Kilpatrick and another individual signed papers indicating the evidence was returned to the county on July 14th, 1969, but no one has seen the evidence since. So there is a paper trail here. You know, the SBI had it. I'm sure they did some analysis on some of the evidence, and then they gave it back to the county sheriff, and then it just disappeared.
That's just some really bad management of evidence.
Well, it seems like it, but a former detective told reporter Jenny Giles that the evidence was put in a landfill.
Well, that's even worse.
Because that's where you want to store your important evidence.
We didn't lose it. We decided to just go ahead and get rid of it.
One of the early suspects was a man named Frank Myers. Former Tempo Music employee Calvert Hunt Jr. told the police that the man he saw in the back seat of Vernon's car was Frank Myers. Frank Myers was the son of Louise Myers Nichols. Louise was one of the people who reported Charles and Vernon missing. Myers was also the half-brother of Sue Nichols, the woman who called Vernon at 5:30 p.m. on July 17th and spoke to Charles instead. She was calling to see if Vernon would babysit for her sister-in-law so that they could go out to eat. Frank Myers was friends with Vernon. According to Calvert Hunt Jr., Charles was jealous of their friendship. He once made a voodoo doll of Frank and disfigured the face. Soon after, Frank was involved in a car accident and needed plastic surgery.
Okay.
Don't mess with that voodoo.
For somebody that didn't really believe in it, so like he knew what he was doing.
Maybe he did believe in it a little bit more than people thought. You know, that voodoo that you do so well. Vernon's friend, Lynn Martin Blackwell, said Vernon helped pay for the surgery, but he wanted Frank to pay him back. On July 18th, 1966, Calvert Hunt was informed that Charles didn't come to work. Hunt mentioned that he saw Frank Myers with Charles and Vernon the evening before. Soon after he made this statement, Myers' mother called Hunt and said he must have been mistaken because he was at Lake Norman near Charlotte. So mom's going to call up and say, well, that can't be true because my son was at the lake.
So is she right, or is she just trying to cover for her son like some moms will do?
Yeah, I don't know. What I do know is that when Myers talked to the police, he gave the same story. One of the many rumors in town was that Vernon had compromising photos of various people in town, and Myers allegedly removed those photos from his house. One anonymous friend told reporter Jenny Giles, I saw some of the pictures. They were not taken at parties. They were not of young people. The pictures I saw were of straight guys without their clothes who posed willingly for the pictures. None of the men were under 18. Some were married men who lived in town. Everybody thought they were straight, even their wives. They weren't blackmailing anyone. Vernon was extremely generous. He would give you the shirt off his back. He was that way towards everybody.
So it sounds like the pictures were no big deal.
Well, I think maybe that's what this person's saying. But if you're a straight married man who allowed some pictures of you to be taken and then later thought, that was a really bad idea, those could come back to haunt me. Could one of these individuals have paid somebody to not only get the pictures back, but silence the individuals involved in taking them?
Yeah, I would think that's possible, right?
It's a theory.
Local business guy, picture is taken with him with no clothes on.
Right. Pillar of the community, married. Is he going to want to risk the fallout?
Yeah. People could make assumptions of those pictures.
I think you could make a lot of assumptions of those pictures. An SBI agent later interviewed Frank Myers, but he didn't reveal anything new. Myers died in 1969 when a Charlotte police officer shot him during a domestic dispute.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah. So something very, very bad happened. Another suspect was a man named John Shadrick, who was 28 years old in 1966. Shadrick had been in prison, but was paroled in June of that year. He was in Hendersonville on Saturday, July 16th. Shadrick was also blonde, which matched the description of the unknown man in Vernon's car on the 17th. On August 13th, 1966, Shadrick and an accomplice tried to force a young man to perform a sexual act. The victim reported that Shadrick said, "I've killed 3 people. I'd just as soon kill you too." Shadrick said he killed the 3 victims at Lake Summit. He reportedly named them, but the names he said were not reported. According to the victim, the accomplice mumbled bumper jacks several times, then said the 4th man. That's where the cops messed up. Unfortunately, Shadrick's charge was later reduced to simple assault, and he was given a suspended sentence.
That's some very interesting things that were said.
If they were said.
Yes.
And that's the key. Then you would have to say that this guy would be up there, right, on the radar. If he really said, "I killed 3 people and I killed these 3 people at Lake Summit," and named them.
And that the fact jacks were used.
Yes. That would be very, very damning. A third suspect was Jim Burrows, a known homosexual acquaintance of Shipman and Glass, according to Hendersonville Police Chief Bill Powers. Burrows was an obituary writer for the Asheville Citizen-Times. Until a week before the murders, he was fired for reportedly coming into work smelling like alcohol.
That's a big no-no.
At most places. Yeah. At some point between July 18th and the 22nd, Burrows called the office to submit a tip. He said, "There are 3 prominent people missing." Lewis Green, the reporter who took the tip, didn't think anything of his statement until the 3 bodies were found on July 22nd. Burrows later confessed to committing the murders to John Scholar, the editor of the WNC Tribune. However, he was never charged because there was no real evidence against him. Most people didn't think he was capable of murder.
Maybe just looking for some attention.
Could be. We know people confess to crimes, even murders, that they didn't actually commit. But I also think there are times when, there are suspects that police are really high on, but they just can't charge them.
Yeah.
Because they don't have enough.
Like we like to move forward, but we can't move forward.
In early 1967, another suspect named Joe Henry Parham was arrested in Fort Myers, Florida on several charges. While in jail, he confessed to the triple homicide, but he was soon ruled out as a suspect because he was incarcerated in another state at the time of the murders.
See, these people that just want to confess drives me crazy.
Yeah, I call it the Henry Lee Lucas effect.
Yeah.
They're getting something out of it. We know what he got out of it. I don't know about some of these other people. Maybe they just want to mess with police. Maybe they want to be more famous. They were already caught. But I think if it's proven that you're incarcerated at the time the murders are committed,
kind of tough.
Yeah, you get scratched off the suspect list pretty quick, I think. One of the most promising suspects was a chiropractor named Paul Saxman, who was 40 years old at the time of the murder and living in Indianapolis. Saxman was born in Hendersonville. His family owned a house next door to Vernon's, and they were childhood friends. After he moved to Indianapolis, he rented the house, and Vernon Shipman agreed to collect the rent for him. In 1965, Saxman found out the payments were not being given to the bank. He accused Charles Glass of stealing the money. About 8 months before the murders, an employee at Tempo Music overheard a heated argument between Saxman and Charles about the money. When Jenny Giles interviewed Saxman for her 2006 series, he was the only living suspect. Saxman tried to end his life in May 1966, but sources did not say why. Now you would think, okay, this guy's in Indianapolis. How did he, have any involvement in these murders in North Carolina? Well, apparently a woman offered to buy his childhood home in June 1966. He said he would be in Hendersonville in July and they could discuss the sale. But the potential buyer was on vacation on July 4th and wanted him to wait for her offer after she returned. She was the person who told Saxman that the bodies were found on July 22nd. Saxman saw a patient on July 14th and did not have another appointment until July 18th.
So he has a time frame there where he could have
potentially been involved. His house went into foreclosure after the murders and was sold in November 1966. The woman who purchased the house found a frog gigging pole with one tine broken off. She turned it into the sheriff's office in February 1967. Investigators wondered if this tool could have made the puncture wounds found on Charles Glass and Louise Shumate's bodies. The SBI crime lab tested the frog gig and found blood on it. But they didn't have the technology at that time to determine if it was human or animal blood. And this was one of the pieces of evidence that was lost in 1969.
Well, that's unfortunate because it could have been a key piece of evidence that turned the case around.
Well, especially with today's technology. I get it, they didn't have the technology back then, but that's why evidence is collected, preserved, because technology is advancing all the time. But if you lose the evidence, or if you intentionally put it in a landfill, kind of hard to go back and use any technology because you don't have the piece of evidence anymore. The Indianapolis police interviewed Saxman. He could not account for what he was doing on the weekend of the murders. And that's never good.
No.
Now, I don't know how long it was, after the murders when they interviewed him. If it wasn't all that long after and you can't account for your whereabouts, that's not great. His estranged wife told the police he was mad enough to have committed the murders. But the key part there for me is estranged.
Yeah, is she really being 100% truthful?
Or is she mad at him and wanting to throw him under the bus? I don't know. The police set up a polygraph for Saxman, but his lawyer told the police he would not take the test. Smart lawyer. Saxman never returned to Hendersonville and never collected a $700 payment from the foreclosure of his parents' home. And I thought that part was strange. You have someone who said they were willing to buy the home.
Right.
You never really follow through with that. And then the home is sold at foreclosure. Apparently there was a $700 payment and you don't bother to collect it.
Why wouldn't you want to collect it?
Maybe you don't want to go back to Hendersonville.
Yeah.
Reporter Jenny Giles spoke to Saxman at his nursing home in October 2006. Again, at that point, he was the last living suspect. He told her Charles Glass was behind the thing and took my money. He claimed he still had no memory of where he was the weekend the bodies were found. Saxman died on November 24th, 2006. Based on their conversation, Jenny Giles did not believe he was the killer. She believed the most likely suspect was a man named Edward Thompson Jr., who was 35 years old in 1966. Thompson was born on June 18th, 1931 in Eden, North Carolina. He was put in juvenile detention 7 times and never completed high school. In 1945, he was convicted of first-degree burglary and sentenced to 4 to 7 years. In 1947, he was charged with murder in Rockingham County, North Carolina, but was found not guilty. The victim was the man who testified against him in the 1945 case.
Well, this kid had a pretty rough childhood.
First-degree burglary at the age of what, 14? Murder at 16, but he's found not guilty. And how are you found not guilty when the victim was a man who testified against you in your earlier trial?
Yeah.
So strange. We don't have all the particulars, but seems strange. In 1950, Thompson was convicted of breaking and entering and sentenced to 10 to 15 years. In 1956, he was convicted of breaking and entering a second time and sentenced to 9 to 10 years. So he's decent at the breaking and entering. He's terrible at the not getting caught.
But he's getting charged these different time frames, but must not be completing them all.
No, 10 to 15 years. He's out in probably 5 or 6, but he's going right back to breaking and entering. And then the second time, he gets a lesser sentence than the first time. And again, only does maybe 4 years, because in 1960 and 1966, he was convicted of assault. He escaped prison in 1966, but was soon rearrested. In 67, he was sentenced to 8 to 10 years for breaking and entering in Buncombe County. 5 years were suspended on the condition that he commit no further crimes.
All right, listen, we're not going to make you do all the time. You just need to tell us you're not going to do this anymore.
Even though you've been doing it since you were, 14 years old?
Yeah. Can you commit to us? Can you do it for us? Who wouldn't say, I won't do it anymore, man. I'm good.
Also, let's break this down. He escaped prison in 1966 and then was out in 1967.
Yeah. Not a really great prison system there, I don't think.
Well, there must not have been much tacked on, if anything, for breaking out of prison. But you're right. I mean, that seems so pie in the sky to say, you know what? We believe in you. We're not going to put you in jail anymore. Just promise us that you won't keep committing these crimes. Later that year, his conviction for the 1966 assault case was set aside, but his appeal on the escape conviction was denied, and he was ordered to serve his sentence in Buncombe County. In 1968, Thompson went on a crime spree where he kidnapped 9 people, raped 5 people, and killed 2 others. We should be doing a whole episode on this guy.
Yeah, he should be on TCAT.
On TCAT. I mean, his rap sheet printed out would be quite a bit of paper. His crime spree started in Hendersonville, North Carolina on May 9th, 1968. At 10:30 p.m., a doctor and his wife were kidnapped from their home at gunpoint. They were forced to drive their car to a house in Fairview where they were injected with drugs from the doctor's medical kit. The captor drove the car from Fairview to Bat Cave. The couple was left at a clinic in Bat Cave at 3 a.m., and the kidnapper stole their car. At 9:30 a.m., the doctor's car was found at a local drive-in. His bag and tape recorder were in the car, and the keys were in the ignition. Officers tried to arrest Thompson that afternoon in Hendersonville, but he shot at them and escaped out a back window of a home. The crime spree continued in June. On the evening of June 16th, a 20-year-old man and a 17-year-old girl were kidnapped at gunpoint near Camp Green Cove in Tuxedo. They were forced to drive to a vacant house near Lake Summit. The girl was raped at this location. Thompson drove them from Lake Summit to Saluda, North Carolina. The young man was locked in the trunk during the drive. Thompson drove up and down Pot Shoals Road. It appeared as if he was looking for something. He finally stopped at an abandoned cemetery and let the man out, then ordered him to drive to a gas station. The young man wrecked the car at 4 a.m. and the couple escaped in Burke County. On the night of June 23rd, 1968, a 23-year-old man and 14-year-old girl were accosted at gunpoint at a closed service station in Henderson County. They had stopped to get drinks from a vending machine. They were forced to drive towards Mooresville. Once they were out of Mooresville, the girl was raped and the man was put in the trunk of the car. Thompson drove 20 miles north, and the couple was taken into the woods and tied up with bed sheets. The girl was raped again. They were left tied up, and their captor stole their car. They eventually managed to free themselves. On June 25th, the state trooper chased the couple's vehicle north of Statesville, but the driver escaped. Right? This guy is pretty good at getting away from the law.
He is, and he has no fear.
No, I think at this point, he doesn't. He has a shootout with the cops. He's able to escape out of a window. He's chased by a state trooper. He's able to get away from him. Thompson was declared an outlaw on June 26th, which stripped him of most legal protection. He was the last person declared an outlaw in the state. I did not know that was actually a thing.
Me neither.
You are now an outlaw.
Maybe that means we don't have to identify ourselves. We can just shoot you.
Shoot first, ask questions later type of thing. One article published by the Hendersonville Times-News during the crime spree said, any citizen who sees him may arrest him on sight or kill him if he resists without being subject to legal action. So it's not only shoot first and ask questions later by police. Any person on the street can try to arrest this man, and if he resists, can shoot and kill him. Now, I don't know how many people are going to want to take that on of trying to arrest this really bad guy, but the young couple's vehicle was found in early July in the woods in Yadkin County with the keys in the ignition. Edward Thompson mailed a letter to the Times-News from the Hendersonville post office on July 9th. He wrote, every time I pick up your Jim Crow news, you got my name in it. Well, I'm still around town, and I hope to get a chance to blast the daylights out of the whole crew. He ended his letter with, I'm going to give somebody something to write about as soon as possible. Thompson was a black man, which likely explains why he made the Jim Crow comment. On July 14th, 3 girls and 2 adults were kidnapped and taken to a house near Roanoke, Virginia. The man and woman were shot to death. Thompson showed up at a relative's house in Rockingham County, North Carolina, with the 3 girls. His family was shocked because they hadn't seen him since 1947.
Wow.
They called law enforcement, and Thompson was finally arrested on July 17th. Hey, we haven't seen you in 20 years. You're in the paper as being this horrible person. What do you want us to do?
Right.
Break out the mashed potatoes?
Like welcome home?
No, we're calling the police. On October 18th, 1968, Thompson was convicted of robbery with a dangerous weapon, 4 counts of second-degree kidnapping, first-degree rape, larceny, and receiving. On July 16th, 1989, Thompson died of AIDS at the state prison in Raleigh. He was 58 years old. 58 years old. Because his crime spree started at like the age of 14.
Yeah. He was destined to spend his life in prison.
Reporter Jenny Giles believes Thompson is guilty of the 1966 triple murders because he reportedly confessed to multiple people. Giles also sees 20 similarities between the triple murder and Thompson's other crimes. For example, the man murdered in Virginia was fully clothed, but the woman's clothes were in disarray. A rubber hose was draped over her shoulders. Objects were left on the 3 Hendersonville victims' bodies. Thompson told one of the couples he kidnapped, per the Times-News, I have a gun. I've already killed 3 people. 2 more won't make a difference. In several cases, Thompson abandoned vehicles close to where the kidnapping occurred. He always left the keys in the ignition. Both Vernon Shipman and Louise Shumate's keys were left in their ignitions. He also ordered victims to drive around and made the driver put both hands on the steering wheel. One of the witnesses who saw Vernon driving on July 17th said he had both hands on the steering wheel and did not acknowledge him. Investigators believed that Thompson was trying to find the 1966 crime scene after he kidnapped the couple in Henderson County in June 1968. The murders occurred near North Lake Summit Road, directly across US 176 from Pot Shoals Road, where Thompson was driving that night. Hendersonville police officers found newspaper clippings about the triple murder in Thompson's home during the crime spree. He once asked a former detective what was going on with the investigation. As we mentioned, all of the suspects are now dead. The main evidence has been lost, which essentially makes it impossible to apply any type of modern forensic techniques to this case.
Right, yeah.
I think, when you look at some of these suspects, I see why, Jenny Giles looks at Thompson as a real possible suspect. I think the one thing that I'm struggling with is that he doesn't match the description of the fourth person in the car.
Right.
Thompson was a black man. The guy in the car was said to have been blonde. So assuming that the guy in the car killed the other three in the car, which I think is a good assumption, because who is he?
What happened to him?
And what happened to him? Why didn't he come forward to tell his story? That, for me, kind of makes it tough. I get it. Thompson was a bad guy.
Sure.
He had a horrible rap sheet and did horrible things. But a lot of the similarities that she pointed out, I think, are things that many killers might do.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know. None of the suspects, to me, jump out as, well, this person has to be the killer.
Yeah, definitive, right?
Yeah, there's obviously nothing definitive. I think you can make the case for a number of them.
Sure you can. But like you said, what are you going to do if you don't have any evidence anymore?
Yeah, there's really nothing. The Saxman guy with the frog gig, he was an interesting character. And the reason I look at him maybe as opposed to Thompson is because he actually had a connection to at least one of the victims, where Thompson would have been a random killer.
Yeah, he just had to show up at the right place and time for him, but wrong place and time for them.
Yeah, which is not out of the realm of possibility, but more often than not, people are killed by people they have some connection to.
Right.
And there's a reason, there's a motive, other than just, hey, I want to go out and kill people. We know some people are like that. But, as we wrap this one up, it's a very interesting case. The fact that these two individuals were gay in the 60s, in the South, could that have been a motive for someone?
Could have been.
Definitely. Maybe they didn't like the fact that they were gay. It sounded like everybody pretty much knew it. The other interesting angle is these pictures that allegedly existed. Could someone have been in one of these pictures and either have been blackmailed with the picture coming out, or just thought after the fact, the picture or pictures exist. I can't live with that.
Yeah. Maybe they were going to run for office
or do something. Yeah. So I don't know. I think people are left to just kind of weigh everything and come to their own conclusions. And sometimes those are some of the most interesting cases.
Sure.
The Blue Ridge murders are a mystery that still haunts Henderson County, North Carolina. Unfortunately, and I think you kind of said this case is going to be really hard to solve and may remain unsolved forever. There's no evidence. The known suspects are all dead.
Right. So what do you do?
And my thought is, even if somehow they could tie the murders to someone, that person probably would never be punished because they would likely already be dead.
Right.
But building a case with no usable evidence is really, really tough. Multiple people confess to these murders.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not enough.
No, you need evidence.
You need something to back that up. And when all of that is in a landfill, that becomes a tough proposition.
Sure does.
But that's it for our episode on the Blue Ridge murders. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, this is Sandra. I've called before. I'm a very big fan. I'm currently listening to the Henry McCabe story. And you guys are talking about, things that make sense when you're drunk don't make sense when you're sober. And it reminded me of a time where I was beyond inebriated at the bar and I was arguing with the bartender because I thought she stole my ID. And my largest point was that without my ID, I would not be able to vote. And I started crying about my ability to vote. It was not even November or March. There were no elections or voting coming up, but I was pretty distraught. I also wanted to say in one of the last week's episodes, you guys were talking about someone removing a kidney. I work in the organ procurement organization world, so like with transplants, and I was actually listening to that podcast episode in my ear, of course, holding someone's kidney in my hand, packaged, but holding a kidney in my hand as we were talking about one of these killers holding a kidney. So I thought that was pretty ironic. Anyway, I love the show. Thank you guys for everything. Bye.
Do you know how many times I've argued with a bartender?
Inebriated?
Yes.
I just thought it was funny because it wasn't like I need my ID to get home or I'll need it down the road. I need it to vote. And voting's not going to occur for months and months and months. But, hey, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
Alcohol can cloud you just a bit.
Sure can.
And make things that are not important seem really, really important.
Yeah.
At the time.
Because it seems like it's so much. But in the kidney in her hand. She had a kidney in her hand.
We keep hearing about these connections.
Yeah.
I'll call them. We've never heard that one.
Do you remember the last time you had a kidney in your hand?
No, I was trying to think. I can't.
The fact that you had a thing.
It's been a while. That much I know. It's been a while.
I would hope so.
But we appreciate the voicemail. All right, buddy, that is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Pluto TV has over 300 channels and thousands of TV shows and movies for whatever mood you're in. Just open the app and something good will already be playing because it's curated by people who love TV as much as you do. So if you're in the mood for comedy, there's 18 channels that'll make you laugh. Looking for drama? We got so much of it, you'll cry tears of joy. Reality shows, game shows, sports, Star Trek, and even more Star Trek. No matter what mood you're in, there's something on Pluto TV. Just download the app and start streaming. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.